Hello, my name is Dean Kriellaars, and I'm a professor at the University of Manitoba. And I'm going to talk to you today about the Physical Literacy Assessment for Youth, or what we affectionately call the Play tools. You can access the Play tools through the portal Play.physicalliteracy.ca. Of today's webinar are to give you a brief background on physical literacy. I'll introduce you to the Physical Literacy Consensus Statement. I'll talk to you about scientifically defined domains of physical literacy, the physical literacy cycle, a very important component of physical literacy, and also talk to you a little bit about physical education, curricular movement skill expectations that we see across this country. And after that, I'll talk to you about the Play tools individually and as an overview. We'll talk about the online access to those tools, as well as the features of each one of the tools. And finally, I'll finish up with upcoming tools that you'll see in the very near future. So I'm going to start off with why do we measure physical literacy? And it's really important to understand that there are a variety of reasons that measurement or assessment or charting of physical literacy are important. Firstly off, as a researcher, as an academic, we like to study things and we like to answer questions. And when we do that, we're doing a selfish pursuit where we're trying to answer a question that we're interested in. And certainly we're always hopeful that answering these questions will help out with society as a whole. The research objectives, though, if you're doing it as pure research, if you're actually doing it to answer a question that's scientifically based, requires ethical approval. So that if you are doing a scientific study, you need to get ethical approval from the individuals that are participating in your study. These Play tools that we're talking about today were designed for research purposes. But when we were designing them over a decade ago, we actually designed them in mind for using them for other purposes, such as program evaluation. So if you're a person at a recreational facility in sport, if you're in education, in particular physical education, or if you're an early childhood educator or even in the performance arts, you have an impact on a person's physical literacy in those programs that you deliver. And as a result of that, most people should be interested in whether their program is being effective or ineffective in developing physical literacy, if that's a stated purpose of your program. So if you're doing program evaluation using the Play tools, you'd be basically asking the question, does the person change over time from the beginning to the end of the program? And if they don't change over that time, you certainly wouldn't be happy with the objectives of your program. So in the end of the day, program evaluation is part of the process of program delivery and is therefore doesn't require ethical approval. There are very special cases where we can use program evaluation for research, but I'm not going to discuss those today. In the next two categories, we talk about assessment for learning and assessment of learning. Assessment for learning is really a concept where we're saying, well, by using this assessment, we can help the individual, the participant, actually create an assessment of themselves at that one time point, which we call a formative assessment, and then say, hey, let's set some goals based on where they are, and then hopefully reevaluate them into the future to see if they've actually reached their objectives. Assessment of learning is really where specific objectives related to the programming achieved. It's kind of like a report card. So if you had curricular objectives in physical education, perhaps, you could use the Play tools as an assessment of learning. The Play tools can perform both assessment for learning purposes as well as assessment for learning purposes. In this early stage of development of the concept of physical literacy worldwide and in Canada, it is important to also use these tools, the Play tools, for awareness. If you hand out one of the tools to a parent, for instance, they will become aware of the concept of physical literacy and may engage with you as a result of that. And if I certainly was a corporation that was in the process or in the programming of physical literacy, I could also use these tools to market my program and say, hey, we actually do change physical literacy in kids or adults. And so awareness, engagement, and marketing are very important elements of the use of these tools as well. We actually happen to use these tools for population surveillance, where we actually look at very large segments of society, many, many thousands of people, and try to understand what the status of our population or subpopulations are. Population surveillance is a very important component of research, but it goes beyond the specific discussions today. And if you measure enough people, you can actually establish what's called normative standards and saying, this is what people look like at this stage, and then say, we want people to look like these values. So there's 7 different reasons that you can use these tools, and the tools actually do work in all of those capacities. Now I'm going to shift off into the background, and I'm going to start off with the Canada's Physical Literacy Consensus Statement. As Canadians, we should be pretty proud of this, and this consensus statement is just that. It took a bunch of people who basically, by consensus, agreed that these are the key elements of physical literacy, that being the affective domain, things like enjoyment, motivation, confidence, enthusiasm, etc., the physical competency, as well as the cognitive domain, which is knowledge and understanding, and finally the engagement in actual physical activity behaviors. Now, this consensus statement is actually not a scientifically rigorous document. It's really just a template to say where we are in general agreement. Scientific definitions of physical literacy do not yet exist, but there are a couple of papers coming out that have actually looked at the essential components, which actually overlap quite strongly with this consensus statement. And here they are. The domains of physical literacy from a scientific viewpoint include, like the consensus statement, the physical competence, of which motor competence is the most important part, where we talk about motor competence in land-based motor skills. Not just fundamental movement skills, but all forms of land-based movement skills, like walking over ice, the ability to jump over an object, the ability to avoid collision, you name it. And it's not just on land, but also as Canadians, we have to operate in snow, ice, water environments. And so overall, when we're talking about motor competence and physical literacy, we're talking about a whole vocabulary of movement that every person should possess. But in general, everybody would agree that all people in Canada need to exist on the land, and therefore we focus on land-based motor skills, and we call those the A's to Z's. We wouldn't want a person just to learn A, B, C, D, E, F, G in the literacy movement, and nor would we want just a person to learn A, B, C, D, E, F, G in movement skills. We need a complete vocabulary of movements to be able to participate in society. The second domain that we talk about scientifically in physical literacy is the psychological domain, which really, from the consensus statement point of view, puts together the affective subdomain and the cognitive domain. The affective domain is things like confidence, motivation, happiness, enjoyment, etc. And the cognitive domain includes things like comprehension, which is things like, do I know what a jump is and how is it different than a hop? Do I understand what different words describe movement? And do I understand the value of doing movement? So we put both the affective and cognitive subdomains together into the psychological domain where they sit. And finally, we talk about the behavioral side. And behavior means, what are you participating in life? Because in the end of the day, the most important thing is if you equip a person with physical literacy, it allows them to participate in what they choose to participate in. And a large part of what we do as human beings is a highly social interaction. So behavior includes the behavioral elements of physical literacy includes not only participation in physical activities, but the social participation as well. We have many measures of physical activity by pedometry and accelerometry, and those are separate from this concept. But ultimately, we do want to see that physical literacy leads to good activity levels as well. Fitness is a very separate component, and there are many well-established fitness parameters, and is a different construct than physical literacy. Here is the physical literacy cycle, and I've color-coded this based on the 3 scientifically defined domains of physical literacy: psychological, behavioral, and physical competence. And in this cycle, which was originally postulated by Liz Taplin from Europe, she basically said that competence leads to confidence, and confidence leads to motivation, and motivation leads to enhanced participation, which further then enhances your movement competence. This cartoon, this positive feedback cycle, has been evidenced in part to be an actual cycle. And the play tools, in part, have been able to support this very simplistic but very meaningful diagram. So we call this the physical literacy cycle. And certainly the play tools were designed to actually measure all 4 of these components of this cycle. This is a summary slide. When we looked at curriculums across Canada, we were able to distill what sort of movement competence children should have by grade 4. And pretty much across the country, you see statements that are saying that there's an expectation that every child by grade 4 will have entry-level competency in the skills that you see listed on this chart. And by grade 5, you'd have more advanced skills. And this is fairly relevant because these are the land-based skills that we think are quintessential to participate in this world. So the play tools were developed to look at these sort of skills that are expectations for our population based on physical education curriculum and expectations for any person of any age actually to be able to do these sort of activities. Certainly this is for able-bodied individuals who don't have physical or mental impairments. But in the end of the day, we do need to develop play tools that are for other populations as well, and it's critical to do so, and I will happy to say that there are some in development. But we do believe that having entry-level competence in all of these skills is vital to participate. Proficiency is another matter. Proficiency would be you're the best at it in the world, and that's interesting, but that's for that one person. We're very interested in having most Canadians having all of these movement skills requisite at an entry level, certainly not less than that. So this Lego diagram helps us understand that competence and movement skills are truly the building blocks of physical literacy. It's the foundational piece of it. Because if you don't know your A, B, C, D, E, F, Gs, you can't really read and write. So if you don't have competence in basic movement skills, you really are limited in your ability to move and participate in an active way in society. So these Lego blocks illustrate what we kind of want in every Canadian. We certainly don't want, on the left-hand side, just 4 movements that we're competent at, because if you only have 4 movements that you're competent at, what can you actually create from those movements? We don't want a smaller subset either. We want to have kind of what we see in the third diagram over, which I've labeled as maybe 18 or 20 Lego pieces. And if you've got all those Lego pieces, we'll call those land-based movement skills. That then at least allows you to participate in land-based activities. And ideally, on the right-hand side, you can see a mess of Lego blocks, which would really represent all the different type of movement skills for participation in land, participation in water, on top of water, in snow, on ice, and even in the air. So ideally, we see land-based movement skills as the gateway to opening up access to many different environments, etc. Into the future, we will have play tools that will assess aquatic literacy, air-based literacy, ice literacy, and snow literacy. But for right now, we focused on land-based movement skills. This is a diagram from some of our research in my lab, which has actually measured the 18 different movement skills that I illustrated to you earlier on using the Play Fun tool. This is on 97 grade 8 children. And we averaged all of their capacities in those movement skills. And in this diagram, you can see that if they're below the level of 50, that means that those 3 or 4 kids don't actually have the competency in movement. And as you move to the right through the green to the purple, you're getting higher and higher proficiency, higher and higher competency in all the different 18 land-based movement skills. And what I want you to see from this is that there is an association, a correlation, between the average motor competence, the physical competence of the person, and their participation in physical activity, which we've measured using accelerometry to measure the number of steps that children have. Now, the step count target for young people is 14,000 to 16,000 steps a day. That's our target. So you can see from this group of kids, which we've known for a long time, is that the activity levels of our children are not reaching the desired target. The adult targets for stepping are 10,000, and for an active adult, 12,000. And And you can see there are a couple of kids here in grade 8 that are meeting those targets at least. But what's important to see here is that there is a relationship, moderately strong, 0.56 correlation, between the motor competence level of the child and how much they participate. This isn't causal. What that means is that if you give more motor competence, it doesn't create more physical activity. I can't say that from this graph. But what this graph does say, there is an association. And that's promising to be able to say that it's likely true that motor competence, giving it in grade 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, in all these different movement skills, will enhance participation in life. And in some of our recent studies that we've done, we've been able to show that that is indeed true. So now we get to the play tools. As I mentioned to you before, the physical literacy domains, based on scientific definitions, include the physical, psychological, and behavioral. And the Play tool suite, which actually consists now of 6 tools, the ones that exist online at this stage, are the Play Fun tool, which measures motor competence and 18 skills, which are curricularly linked and important for society. The Play Fun tool also assesses the confidence of the person in producing each one of those 18 skills. As well, it assesses the cognitive ability, the comprehension of the 18 different movement skill terms. Does the child actually understand the words of movement? Play Basic is basically the same as Play Fun, except it only does 5 skills. So it's an expedited version of Play Fun. Then we come into very important components, the perceptions of physical literacy. So we have the Play Self tool, where a child or an older adult or an adult can fill out the Play Self tool, and it's their perception of their own physical literacy. It may not match with the reality, but that's the point. Similar to Play Parent, where a parent or a guardian of a child can fill out their perceptions of their own child's ability. And finally, we have Play Coach, or Play PE teacher, or Play Recreation leader. It doesn't matter. Somebody who is a person involved in developing physical literacy in people, it's their surrogate assessment of a child or a participant. These perceptions are very important because if the perceptions don't match between that of reality, measured by Play Fun or Play Basic, or the perceptions don't match between the self, the coach, and the parent, those help you identify how to interact with that person and intervene, because you can then identify barriers and facilitators. Finally, we have the Play Inventory tool, which is really just a checklist of the physical activities that you participate in. So each one of these tools measures various elements of the constructs that we see on the left, the domains. We've got a measurement of physical competence through motor competence, through Play Fun and Play Basic, and even through Play Coach and Play Parent. We've got psychological components being measured by Play Self and Play Parent, Play Coach, as well as Play Basic and Play Fun. And behaviorally, we use the inventory. We don't have a social assessment yet at this stage, but I think that's going to be a very important one to develop into the future. So let's go into the details of the Play tools. As I mentioned earlier, Play Fun and Play Inventory are kind of like the objective, even though they're subjective assessment tools, they kind of tell you the facts, the reality. And Play Fun will be administered by people who are well trained, and Play Inventory is a checklist filled out by the child or participant. But those represent the reality of the person. The 3 other components around are really perceptions of that reality. And you can well imagine that there are circumstances where the coach has a different perception of a child than the child's own perception, and even different parents will have different perceptions of the child. But that is the key. By knowing the perceptual differences between the reality and all the different perceptions, that then allows you to specifically tailor interventions, help, for that person. And these tools were designed specifically for that, both from a research point of view and also from a point of view of just individual formative assessment and goal setting. The Play tools were developed in a very rigorous manner at the University of Manitoba using what's called the Cosman Health Instrument Checklist, which is a very rigorous technique checklist that says these are the features of a tool that you have to have in order for it to be used. And these tools have been deployed by Canadian Sport for Life, and the features of these tools are very promising. They were originally designed for research in my lab, but have had very excellent utility for program evaluation. And in fact, almost all the other components that I alluded to earlier on. Some of the key features that they have is they have very good to excellent reliability. And what that means is that if you measured somebody today and you measured them a day later or so, that's called test-retest reliability, the measurements would come out the same. Of course, they don't be identical because not everybody's happy every day and moving the same way every day, but that's simply noise. But you would expect that given no major changes in an individual, that the test-retest reliability should be very, very good. And it is. The correlation values range from 0.92 to 0.99 and inter-class correlation values. The other thing that you want to have is what's called inter-rater reliability. And what that means is that you expect the, if one observer using the PlayFun tool looks at a child and another observer looks at the child at the same time, and if they've been adequately trained, you'd expect that those two numbers of assessment would come out to be very similar numbers. And indeed they do. When we train individuals to use PlayFun and PlayBasic, the ones that really require training, the inter-rater reliability comes out to be in the excellent category, 0.9. And that's very, very important for a tool to have those features. Although there are no physical literacy tools that were developed in the past, there are some tools that have assessed motor competence that were designed for looking at medical disability settings. The test of gross motor development is one of them. The BOT is another. So what we did was we took our play tools and we compared our play tools to other measurements of motor competence. That's called concurrent validity. And our concurrent validity for similar populations at the current ages was very good to excellent. And that means that they're measuring appropriate constructs. The benefit, though, of the play tools is that they don't just measure disability, they measure ability. And many of the other medical tools for measuring gross motor development were designed to detect deficits of behavior, not ability in behavior. The final features, there's many other features, but there are two critical ones. We've made the tools to be easy to interpret so you can understand what a value means. And also, we design them so that they're very sensitive to change. And it can discriminate between time and time again. So sensitive to change means that if you measure over a short period of time and you've done an intervention, that you can actually see that that change occurred. The play tools were designed over a wide age range. Not all of them go down to 4 years of age, but they do go from 4 years of age all the way up to older adults. The PlayFun tool is about 7 years of age that we like to administer it down to. It has been used younger, but you get a little bit more noise in the data as a result of that. Each play tool has a workbook that you can download from the website, a form for scoring it, a score sheet, a tracking sheet to see how people are changing over time, gives you calls to action, and there's a whole website support section for each tool. And here's that website. You can actually go to this website, physicalliteracy.ca, and find out all about the play tools, and you can see the list of the tools there. Play Basic, Play Coach, Play Fun, Play Parent, Play Self, and Play Inventory is basically a single sheet. So in the end of the day, the tools are accessible online, and they have a fair bit of supporting documents. Now, interestingly enough, we've been lucky enough to have a full online data entry for 3 of the tools. Play Fun, which is the motor competence, confidence, and comprehension tool. Play Basic, which is the tool that measures 5 of the 18 different skills that Play Fun measures. And Play Self, which is the self-assessment tool. So you can register as a leader, whether that's in sport, early childhood education, physical education, doesn't matter. You can add your participant list and create groups of participants, and that means that you can enter that data online and you can track the progress over time. You can get reports on groups of individuals at any time, as well as individuals over time. Here's the online entry portal. So it looks a little bit different than the general information page, but you can give yourself register as a user, get your password, it's all password protected, and then you can actually enter in your data on this website. Here's an example of the editing that you'd have and the ability to enter information on Play Self, Play Fun, and Play Basic. And this is the participant list section. There are no participants in this account, but you basically see all the individuals in front of you. Here's some of the data entry information. Here we put in their first name, their last name, potentially their nickname, and you can create groups of individuals based on that. Here's an example of some of the data entry components here. This is a Play Basic entry portal. And so you'd have a slider scale, which is on the bottom of the screen. You can see here there's a slider that I can actually scroll through and move the slider from 0 to 100. And wherever they are along this continuum, that's my assessment of their motor competence for this one skill, which in this case is called run there and back. I can also prompt and check off here whether they have low confidence prior to executing the skill. If they exhibit low confidence behavior, which we train you to understand and detect, then you flag them as low confidence. We don't flag them with medium and high confidence. That's more difficult to discern. But you also determine through interaction with them whether they needed a prompt to continue the movement, whether they needed a description to do the movement, or a demo to do the movement. And if you're doing it in pairs or more than 2 people, there's also the ability of the child to mimic another person, so that's also detectable. So let's talk about the tools specifically. Play Fun, this is the Play Fun tool. And what you can see here is it's a very simple tool with 18 different tasks from top to bottom, and the 18 different movement skills or tasks are actually like the Lego blocks, right? We want every single child to reach a level of competence which is above the 50% mark. If they have the basic skill competency, you check them off above this line. Of course, you're going to be doing that for all 18 different skills and give them a score going from 0 to 100. Of course, you don't use the number, you use a visual analog scale. And you give them a score for each one of the 18 different tasks that they're going to do for you. If they exhibit low confidence prior to execution of it, or even during, you give them a flag. And then you can also flag them for any one of the type of comprehension problems that they might have executing these skills. And so in this way, you get a measurement of the competence in 18 different movement skills, the confidence, one flag for each skill, and a comprehension of the person of the movement skills. So if they had 18 confidence flags, that'd be something that you'd want to remove into the future. If they had a large number of comprehension flags, that's something through intervention you'd want to improve upon. And finally, you'll be able to see through the movement skill set here where they are along in development of motor competence. The first 3 skills are locomotor skills. These next skills from number 4 to number 8 are transport skills. Then we've got some upper limb skills from 9 to 12, some lower limb skills, 13 and 14, and then some body control and balance skills at the bottom. As I said before, we've got this wonderful, as you see on the bottom, scale that goes from 0 to 100 millimeters, and it's separated into 2 parts, developing and acquired. So if you give the person a score of under 50, if they don't have the skill yet, they get a score under 50. If they have no ability to produce the skill, they get a score of 0. If they get into above 50, they've acquired the skill. That means they have that as their part of their movement vocabulary. From 50 to 75, competency, and then from 75 to 100 is proficiency. The very top number that they can get is 100. Now that would be the best execution of that skill for anybody in the world. So it's not just for their age group, it's anybody. Now we use what's called a holistic rubric, which means that we give you a verbal, a textual description of what it means to do something initially, what it means to do something emerging, competently, and proficiently for each one of those 18 skills. As an example, I have the holistic rubric here for the run, turn around, and run back movement skill, which includes the ability to accelerate, decelerate, turn around effectively, accelerate, and decelerate, and stop at a line. So you can see here that a child or a participant who's in the initial stages will illustrate these sort of features. If they're in the emerging stage, you'll illustrate these features, competently, these features, and proficiently, these features. You then get a schema, what's called a motor schema in your head, and by developing these schemas, it allows you to rapidly assess their motor competence. And as I said before, this scale works very, very well for assessing kids both accurately and reliably. Here's some results from it. Here we did the overhand throw, and we checked out many thousands of children in ages 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. Here's a curricular expectation line, and you can see that our Canadian kids here are not reaching or few are reaching curricular expectations. But the disconcerting part here is that even though boys and girls are the same in overhand throwing at age 6 as they should be, there's a separation, a gap that occurs in motor competence between boys and girls. And by age 8, the girls are statistically behind in the motor competence in this skill of overhand throwing. And that persists through life. And that's a scary thing because our curricular expectation is the same for boys and girls. Boys and girls both need to throw and need to throw competently. So this is very important that our tools can actually discern this, because that can help us create better interventions and better programming to circumvent this gender gap in motor competence. Here's the same thing that we see here for kicking a ball. Now we can see that 6-year-old boys and girls have the same competency, not different yet, but by age 8, there's a lack of competence in girls. The boys aren't much better than the girls because they're not reaching the curricular expectation line, but nonetheless, this gap is occurring at fairly young ages, even though our curricular expectation says they should be executing the same. When I show you all 18 of the skills measured by the Play Fun tool, when the boys are better than girls, the values are positive. So all of those bars to the right, lift and lower, drop to the ground, come right back up, all the object manipulation skills, and all of the basic running skills, locomotor skills, the males are superior than the females. The girls are better at skipping. Now, the correct answer here on this graph is that all of the lines, all of the values should be 0. This is what society does to young women, and this is a tragedy because it blocks participation for those children who have lower motor competence skills, whether they're a boy or a girl. So this we call the gender gap in motor competence, and it perfectly explains why girls drop from fairly low activity levels under the age of 11 to almost no activity after puberty. This illustrates part of that in this sort of Christmas tree diagram that I have here. I've listed some of the competency skills on the right that we expect competency by grade 4 in all of these skills. So that means that if you had competency in all of these skills, you'd have 17, or in this case 18 skills that you're competent at. You'd have a movement vocabulary of 18 different movement skills. And in this diagram, you can see this is an entire town in Canada of grade 4 children. And what you see here is that there's only one girl that actually in grade 4 has all of these movement skills. There's 2 boys. That's tragic, because the actual answer is all 17 should be there in all children. And that's not phys ed's fault. It takes a community to raise a physically literate child, and our culture is a no-move culture, and that's a major problem. What you do see here, though, is that at the bottom, there's actually 11 girls that have none of the movement competencies, none of the skills that are required. They don't go above 50 on the Play Fun scale. For the boys, there's 5 boys that don't have any movement skill competency. So when you look at this graph, you can see that the boys aren't much better than the girls. The girls are certainly worse, as I showed you in the previous diagrams. But the ultimate goal is to invert this Christmas tree so it looks upside down. And I'm happy to tell you that through 3 different intervention studies that we've completed over the last few years, that you can actually achieve this with good quality physical literacy programming guided by information derived by the Play tools. So we don't want kids down here at the bottom having just 4 Lego bits. We want every kid to have 18 Lego bits, all of them competent in 18 different movement skills, at least. Play Basic is really quite simple. It's 5 skills instead of 18. And the skills were chosen to represent locomotor skills, transport skills, upper limb manipulation, lower limb manipulation, and balance. So they represent each of the major categories of movement skills. And it uses exactly the same scale as Play Fun. This is just a more rapid way of assessing a child. It's less specific because you don't know where they're different, if you do 18 skills, you get more information than just 5. But as a pretty good indicator of the general level of physical literacy, Play Basic works quite nicely. Play Self is a fun one because the child, as grade 3 we kind of start off, and we can go all the way up to any age with this tool. So it's not just children, it can be adults as well. And I encourage adults to actually fill it out. It's quite revealing. And it's separated into 3 sections, which I've shown here. The very top of the scale asks the person, how much do you participate in gym, water, ice, snow, outdoors, and playground? And they basically have excellent participation in the gym. I've never tried it. So it gives you a snapshot of how much they participate in each one of these environments. The next questions are the really critical ones, although the environmental participation is just important. Questions 7 to 18 ask about self-efficacy, enjoyment, health, worry, comprehension, confidence, eagerness, talent, desire. All of these are assessed by the child themselves about their own ability. And finally, the last section is the valuing of literacy section. So it basically compares literacy, the ability to read and write, numeracy, the ability to do math, and physical literacy, the ability to move, in 3 different settings, at school, at home, and with friends. I'm going to show you a slide that shows you some of the results of this valuing literacy parts here. So this is 14,000 Canadian children answered that last section of Play Self, and it's very telling. If you look at this first star here, and very important is up here, not so important is down here. This blue star, we asked the kids, how important is reading and writing in school? And they all answer quite nicely, very important. By the way, the circle and the bars represent the mean and the 95% confidence interval. Scientific talk for how tight the data is. So what you see here is that the reading and writing ability is very important and valued in school. Is it valuable at home? Not so much, but still important. Is it valuable with their friends? To a limited degree. How about math? The children tell us, Canadian children, math is very important, and it is the place that you learn it in school. It's more important statistically than reading and writing at school. Is math important at home with family? Medium. Is math important with your friends? Not so much, because you can calculate on your smartphone. But the beautiful part is here is that when you look at these last 3 components, you ask a child, how important is movement in school? And they answer that it is less important than numeracy and literacy because our schools are not, in general, movement friendly. That represents our adult culture imposed on a child. Here we see the second question, how important is movement at home and with family? And it's statistically significantly greater than the importance of math and reading and writing. So kids want to move with their family. They value it as very critical. That's a good sign. The last one is a beautiful representation. Here we ask, how important is movement with friends? And you can see in this circle in the end that they highly value movement with their friends, way more important than valuing math with their friends or reading and writing with their friends. So we say movement is the social agent of change for a child, but it's suppressed in our culture. So this is kids screaming at us to say, let's get moving. I showed you earlier on that cycle, where there's a cycle between competence and confidence, and this will help validate that concept for you, the physical literacy cycle. What I have here is that we ask the kids how confident you are in performing activity. High confidence at the top here, low confidence at the bottom. And remember I told you that at age 8, the girls' competence in movement is lagging behind the boys. And sure enough, after you lose competence, what you see here very clearly is a statistical and substantial decline in confidence to produce activity in the girls because of lack of competence, whereas the boys stay relatively stable. And this is, once again, a manifestation of the gender mistreatment in our society. But neither boys nor girls are at the levels that they need to be. Finally, this is enjoyment or happiness derived from being physically active. This is 14,000 Canadian kids, aged 5 to 13 this time, where we asked this is the question number 10 from the Play Self tool, and we asked the kids, I believe that being physically active makes me happy. They all know it makes you healthier, but happiness is really what makes people active. I do things for fun and friendship. Happiness derives from that. The 5-year-olds are very happy with movement, as all 5-year-olds are. 6-year-olds simmer down a little bit. At age 8, the boys and girls are still associating happiness with physical activity, but at age 8, the girls begin to lose competence, as I showed you before. At 9 and 10, the girls begin to lose confidence. And by 11, 12, and 13, we begin to see girls dissociate happiness from physical activity. And in fact, see this number 3? As soon as they go at or below 3, they're actually associating unhappiness with physical activity. This is a tragic tale and something that can be remedied by delivering competence and helping children develop confidence and talent at an early age, and the play tools help you do that. Play inventory is quite a simple thing. It's a checklist. Here's 80 different things that they can fill in. They can fill in other things that aren't on the list. And they basically put a check mark of what they've done in the last 6 months or the last year. And then our spreadsheet then calculates how many environments they participate in, whether they do team or individual sports, what the intensity of activity that they do by a guess, what environments that they participate in, and whether they're in competitive or non-competitive settings. Play parent is very similar to play self, but it has overlapping constructs or questions that match with what the child says and what the coach says or what the phys ed teacher says. And that's important to identify mismatches. The child could be confident, but the child may think they're not confident, and the parent may think their child is confident. So there's going to be mismatches there. Instead of using a 5-point scale, we just used low, medium, and high for parents because we found that parents are unlikely to use the word poor or fair for their children, but they will use the words low, medium, and high. Play coach, again, very similar in design to play self and play parent, overlapping questions about confidence, motivation, comprehension, etc. But here, with a person who's knowledgeable about movement, we can ask them to use a rating scale of poor, fair, good, very good, and excellent. So we ask them about their psychological componentry here, their competencies here, and their general physical literacy level up here. And the question is, does a coach's assessment or a phys ed teacher's assessment match up with the Play Fun tool? And in general, it can, but in certain circumstances, there can be a complete mismatch between what the coach thinks is actually happening and what the actual motor competence of the child is. Finally, I'm going to tell you in an exciting sort of way that we've just finished the design and testing of 3 new tools: the Play Creativity tool, the Play Asymmetry tool, and the K-Play tool. Play Creativity is the first ever assessment of movement creativity. The research trials and early development of this tool have gone very, very well, and we'll be doing a very large trial across Canada assessing movement creativity. And this is very important because in this day and age where outdoor play and free play is restricted, that may limit movement creativity and as such limit overall creativity. And so for us to be able to demonstrate and see how creativity is changing over time in children and with different programming is very important. And creativity, movement creativity, is a critical part of physical literacy. So we're very happy about that tool. Play Asymmetry was designed with our, because we found out that asymmetry in movement can result in injury. And so it's not just asymmetry in muscle size, but asymmetry in how you move from right to left or left to right. If you're bilaterally asymmetrical, it can either limit your performance or increase your injury. Either way, we needed a tool. The Play Fun tool only assesses really one side. So we had to come up with a tool that measures both the ability on the right and left side for major movement categories. And finally, we needed a specific tool where for children of younger ages, which we call K-Play, standing for kindergarten, and where most children in ages 4 to 7 are doing a lot of free play, dedicated lesson planning or structured, semi-structured play environments are what happens in those ages, and so it becomes more difficult to assess them in a very structured manner. So K-Play is kind of like a free-form assessment tool to assess children's physical literacy levels, motor competence, confidence, etc., for the children of that age group by using a free-form assessment approach. So the physical literacy tools, again, are accessible by the portal Play.physicalliteracy.ca. You can certainly just type in the Play tool acronym, Physical Literacy Assessment for Youth, or Play Tools, and you'll find lots of information on the internet. Go to the website, physicalliteracy.ca, go to the portal for data entry. Certainly Sport for Life is a champion of physical literacy and is a great website because it's embedded in their long-term athlete development plan. If you want a Play Tools workshop, you can go to this portal on the Canadian Sport for Life website and look at community workshops. and you can fill in a request for if you want to learn how to use the Play tools, meaning Play Fun particularly and Play Basic. You'll want to sign up for a 3-4 hour workshop which we call Physical Literacy 201, the Play Tools. And you can request that workshop and have one of us come out to train you in the utilization of all of the tools, but in particular the 2 tools that require specific training, Play Fun and Play Basic. I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you that the International Physical Literacy Conference is upcoming April 12th to 15th in Toronto, Canada. It'll be the 3rd ever International Physical Literacy Conference and the 4th International Physical Literacy meeting. And we're very excited to have it here in Toronto, and it will be hopefully a bigger and better success than even the last one in both Vancouver and in Banff. This webinar was brought to you by the RBC Learn to Play project people, so thank you very much to the RBC. Sport for Life goes without saying, Public Health Agency Canada and Participation for supporting these webinars. So that ends our physical literacy assessment workshop.